The term third place was coined back in the 1980s as a home away from home, but it's being discussed today as much as ever because it really is the solution to so many of the problems we're having, both as individuals with physical and mental health, and collectively as a group of people who really, as much as ever, need to come together and have conversations and sort of just be with each other, not just virtually, but physically, and doing things that we love together. And that's really what these third places are about. And in interviews recently, Scott Galloway and Trevor Noah are talking about the importance of these third places. In that conversation and in other areas, Scott Galloway has talked about how there's this real distinct need for relationships in young people these days. He often talks about young men, but I think it's really something that we're all feeling, this need for relationships, a lack of true friends, the need for networking, the intersection of different people, not just the same type of people, not just an echo chamber online or in some area that it's really just more of the same type of people with the same interests. These third places really become areas where a common interest, a common activity, that becomes the thing that brings you together, regardless of how old you are, regardless of how you feel about different issues. And this is why these activities are the basis for so much of my work, which is creating these third place projects based around activities and events that we love. So things like climbing, skateboarding. It doesn't really matter what the activity is. For me, it's been climbing. That's something I've been a part of for almost 35 years now. And it distinctly changed my life because of exactly this. And so now my work is focused on helping people create these places. But the activity itself is sort of secondary to all of the things we get out of it, which is this feeling of adventure, this feeling of community, this feeling of strength. Being able to learn something, being able to get good at something, being able to be around other people who are doing the same thing, that has nothing to do with how old you are or how big you are or any other sort of characteristics. If you're good at something, if you care about something, that is such an important common interest that becomes the thing that sort of slices through and just goes right through all of the nonsense that often keeps us apart. And because you're putting all these different people together, different ages, different economic classes, different focuses sort of outside of that particular arena, it creates an opportunity for people to have role models, for people to have influence, for people to be with other people and learn from other people in ways that maybe they're not getting at home. Maybe there is no one at home who can be this person. Maybe it's just a different voice. I know for me personally, I had a great family situation, but being around people who were interested in climbing specifically, they were looking at life in just a very different way. And the way that they spent their time, the way that they spent their money, the way that they spent all of their resources to have this thing be the center of their life. Even when I was 15 years old, that was a very different way of looking at life. And that was an important aspect of that sense of, future adventure. And, again, 35 years later, that has proven to be the case where that sort of interest and that common interest with people who are 10, 15, 20 years older than me, who were taking me out to show me different climbing areas or climb with me in the gym or whatever it was, that was truly defining in terms of not just the activity itself, but being able to see a way forward and see adults who were actually doing the thing as professionals, as parents that I wanted to do. And so that took me out to Colorado from the East Coast. And it was just even more of that because now all of a sudden you are with people who are doing all sorts of activities, whether it's biking or skiing or climbing, certainly, and people who are much older, people who were famous authors, people who were really international best-selling authors who were climbing in the gym with me, people who are world champion climbers who I'm still friends with to this day. And I watch their kids grow up. And so watching people live their lives with these activities as a central part of it, but only part of their life, and often in very healthy lifestyles. So really being committed to getting good at something and being, in a lot of cases, the best that they can be, either in climbing in some cases or in other areas in other cases. And then climbing is this sort of hobby, this thing that has doesn't have the pressure of being your job, but is an important part of your life, and often becomes kind of, again, the home away from home, whether that's at the climbing gym or at even at a crag when you're outside, because that's how you sort of structure so much of your week to be able to do that. And this idea of doing cool things in cool places is distinctly different than playing video games, living online, doing things on an app. And that's a really good thing to me, to be part of that sort of counter trend today. But in reality, this has always been the thing that people like to do, is doing cool things together in cool places. And, for some people, a lot more people, it used to be things like church or other areas that we used to go to back in the 80s and 90s. And different businesses have tried to take over a lot more of this. Back in the 2000s and 2010s, businesses were really trying to collect more of your time by offering more, doing your laundry or giving you meals or giving you, oh, look, we've got an arcade in the office. But it's sort of always in the guise of keeping you there more, or giving you a distraction or a break. And, I think a lot of it was intended positively, but it wasn't as sort of deeply important as a home away from home, not your workplace, but a different place, a third place. And that's why having that at work is difficult. And today, it actually, ironically, is sort of inversed, where a third place in your office is difficult, but I do think that your office in a third place is actually totally possible, because, or at least in part, because we see this now with co-working places, or places that are more informal co-working places where you can just go and work there. So it's not even necessarily a dedicated office. It might just be a very cool lounge or a sort of phone booth that you can make calls from in between going climbing, or before you go climbing, or after you go climbing. Oh, I'm going to go climb for an hour. I'm going to make my phone call I have to do and then get back to my workout. I used to do that all the time. Or being able to do work in a different environment, like in a climbing gym or in a co-working space that has an amazing relationship and an amazing environment, not because the desk and the chair are the top of the line, Herman Miller, whatever, but because you're in a different environment, and an environment around people who are interested in that same activity or have the similar reasons for being in that space, but also are doing these other things, like really trying to focus on building their own business or whatever. And so often these things go hand in hand. And what ends up happening is you have these chance encounters where you're both in a climbing gym doing your work or making, your phone calls, answering emails, whatever it is. And you happen to find out that the person right next to you, or the person you may have been climbing with for 6 months or a year or an hour or whatever, is actually doing something that you're very interested in, or that you actually may be able to help them with. Or maybe it's somebody who you might want to go and get a coffee with, romantically or not, whatever. The point is that these become relationships that are foundational often and transformative. I know so many people who met their future spouse in a climbing gym. I know so many people, including myself, who met future business partners in a climbing gym, not because you were there for some sort of a meetup, but because you were there to go climbing. And it happened to be, in my case, a conversation of, oh, you have a climbing gym. I used to design climbing walls. Now I'm working as an architect. I have thoughts on what could be next. And that was, in my case, almost 20 years ago, when I first started developing climbing gyms around the country. And that genuinely grew out of an interest in climbing that became a friendship, that became a very interesting business relationship. And then now the foundation of everything I do today with my work. So these third place projects, these third places are not just about the activity themselves. It's about all of these other things that come with that. And so the challenge, I think, becomes, how do we create access to these places if we all agree that they're really critical and actually are the solution to so many of the problems people are having today, which I think has been pretty clearly shown. And I know anecdotally, I just see over and over, including personally. So, how do we do that as business owners, as people who are opening businesses and helping other people open businesses? In my case, how can we give access to these places that are not free? They're often places you have to pay to go to. Places like religious buildings, like churches or wherever, are truly one of the, and it kind of have always been one of the most interesting sort of free interior places to go. Like nobody's punching a ticket when you go into a church typically. But that isn't really enough of an answer today in the sense that, for people who aren't into that or for people who are looking for other types of activities, where do you go? How do you get in there? So what can we do as business owners where you are able to provide access? Is it through sponsorship? Is it of programs? Is it through nonprofit organizations within your for-profit business or adjacent to it that allow for people who can pay sort of whatever they can pay to come in or not pay? Is it different periods of the week where you allow different groups of people or different sort of pay scales or discounted memberships at different times to try to bring in people who may not be able to afford a full fee membership? What is it that we can do as business owners, as business operators, as business creators who are creating these spaces, these environments, because we know how important they are? Because chances are you've experienced exactly what I'm talking about. It may sound very blue sky, but most people I work with have experienced exactly what I've been talking about. And that's why they're choosing to spend their whole life focusing on creating businesses that are around that. And because what a nice way to look at life, where this idea of adventure, this idea of freedom, this idea of agency, being able to make decisions, this is all the same things we want for life. This is what you get out of these activities. And this is what we want our businesses to be. So there's a real consistency from personal to activity to professional that we can create across the board if we choose to. So how do we bring more people into that? How do we offer these third places that we need them to be successful businesses so they can exist? But how can we do more with that? What partnerships can we make? What ways of operating? What pricing models? What ways can we bring more people in, invite more people in, so that we can just continue to offer this as a very legitimate solution to a lot of the issues around isolation and mental and physical health and loneliness and depression and all of these things that it turns out just being together in a cool space, doing cool things, takes care of in so many ways. So this is why these spaces are so important. This is why I'm so happy when I hear people like Trevor Noah and Scott Galloway talking about it, because there's tremendous opportunity here. There's tremendous opportunity on the business side, on the societal side, and how can we sort of make those work together? That's really, critical to me. And that's why I think that's such a worthwhile problem to be spending our time working on. So thank you very much for watching, and reach out if you'd like to talk. Take care.